Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jim Stockard. I'm the curator of the Loeb Fellowship. Welcome, first of all, to the Graduate School of Design. This lecture series, as many of you know, typically takes place at the Boston Public Library, but we at the GSD are particularly happy to be the venue for this talk tonight. Dean Mohsin Mostafavi has often said to us at the GSD that much of our goals should be about design excellence and social engagement. As such, we welcome you to a place where inquiry is always on the table, where new ideas are continuously pursued, and where we ask our students and ourselves to design and plan not only for today, but for the problems that will face our communities tomorrow. Welcome also to the 8th Annual Loeb Fellowship Boston Society of Architects Lecture. Each year through this partnership, the BSA invites one of our Loeb alumna or alumnus to come here and give a lecture in its series. This has brought such people as the chief planner of Washington, D.C., Harriet Tregoning, Boston architectural photographer Peter Vanderwalker, and Boston architect Antonio DeMambro to this podium. Tonight we welcome Phil Freelon of the Loeb Fellowship Class of '90 to join that number. And finally, welcome to the first event of the 40th anniversary reunion and symposium of the Loeb Fellowship. The Loeb is the GSD's unique program that provides a year of independent study for mid-career practitioners whose work involves the built and natural environment. Since 1970, over 400 of these young emerging leaders in the fields of architecture, landscape architecture, city planning, public art, urban journalism, community development, and related fields have come here to the GSD to improve their skills and to explore the leadership roles they may have in the future. The theme of this year's reunion and symposium is Urban Futures, Opportunities and Challenges in Transforming the Urban Landscape. We will look briefly back at everything that has happened in the 40 years since John and Frances Loeb founded this fellowship, troubled by what was going on in American cities in the late 60s. But we will focus most of our attention on anticipatory thinking about the next 40 years. What do we want our cities and our natural areas to be like in 2050, the middle of the 21st century? What changes in technology, science, access to information, and global development will impact the design of our urban environments? And what actions do we as designers and planners need to take now to ensure that those outcomes are most likely to occur in the future that we like? By the way, we welcome you to any of our sessions on Friday and Saturday where we will discuss those topics. Come and join us. The Loeb Fellowship is not so much about rewarding great accomplishment, though its recipients have often achieved great things in their careers. It is much more focused on giving emerging leaders time and the rich intellectual resources of this school and this university so that they can step up to the next level of performance and lead in ways they might never have imagined. And so it's fitting that this lecture is the first event in our celebration. We will hear tonight about an addition to the mall in Washington, D.C. It is the Museum of African American Culture and History. Surely, this is a critical new institution for our nation. After so many years of cruelty and prejudice, of inbred biases passed on from generation to generation, of stories not told, what will we say to our children and our grandchildren about the pain suffered by many of our fellow Americans and the enormous accomplishments achieved in spite of that? How will we break the discrimination cycle by telling our whole story in a way that actually changes the way people behave? And what is the power of exceptional design to enhance the story, to make it linger in people's minds, and in the hands of these two architects, to embody that story? This is what Loeb Fellows are interested in. Not a catalog of what is wrong with our urban environment, though good analysis is important. Not a long list of who's to blame, though there's some of that to go around. But change. Change that makes the places we live, work, learn, and relax more beautiful, more just, more accessible, more sustainable, and more engaging. And so we eagerly await the comments of Phil and David, and once again, welcome you to the GSD. Now I want to turn the podium over to the president-elect of the Boston Society of Architects, Audrey O'Hagan. Audrey is the principal of O'Hagan Associates with over 25 years of award-winning practice in this country and in Great Britain. She is the winner of the 2006 Business Week Architectural Record Award for Design Excellence and has been named one of the top 10 architects in New England by Women's Business Boston. Audrey?
Thank you, Jim. And thanks to the Harvard Graduate School of Design for hosting and co-sponsoring this event, along with the Boston Society of Architects, as well as NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects, who are hosting their 38th International Conference and Exposition this week from October 7th through 9th. So if you have a chance, you should get over there and have a look at what's going on. Just a quick word about the Boston Society of Architects. The BSA is one of the largest and most inclusive chapters of the American Institute of Architects. Our members, including allied industry professionals, students, and citizens who are also passionate about architecture, promote excellence in design and the built environment through a wide range of programs from building technologies, humanitarian and sustainability efforts, to urban design and historic preservation. Membership in the BSA, by the way, is open to absolutely everybody who's interested in design and design excellence. And you don't have to join to get involved. So if you're interested in more information, I would encourage you to visit architects.org. Tonight's discussion will surely be one of the richest. We're pleased to hear from Philip Freelon, Fellow of the American Institute of Architects and Loeb Fellow, as you've heard previously, and David Adjaye, RIBA and Honorary Fellow of the American Institute of Architects. David and Phil, as you know, led the internationally renowned team of architects chosen to design the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Tonight, they are going to discuss their collaboration and the winning design. Philip Freelon is the founder and president of the Freelon Group in Durham, North Carolina. His work has been published widely in professional journals, mass market publications such as Architectural Record, Metropolitan Home, and the New York Times. In 2008, Contract Magazine named him Designer of the Year, and his furniture design has been recognized nationally, including first prize in the PPG Furniture Design Competition and by contract work with Herman Miller. A native of Philadelphia, Phil earned his Bachelor of Environmental Design degree in architecture from North Carolina State University and his Master of Architecture degree from MIT. In addition to his year at Harvard as Loeb Fellow, he has served as an adjunct faculty member and visiting lecturer and critic at numerous universities and colleges across the country. He is currently on the faculty at MIT's School of Architecture and Planning, and I'm pleased to say that one of my staff members is one of his fellow students. And she speaks very highly of you, by the way. Among his numerous awards and accreditations, Phil is the 2009 recipient of the AIA Thomas Jefferson Award for Public Architecture. David Adjaye, founder and principal at Adjaye Associates, is one of the leading architects of his generation, with a reputation as an architect with an artist's sensibility and vision. Adjaye Associates now has offices in London, New York City, and Berlin. A native of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, David received his master's in architecture from the Royal College of Arts in London. That same year, he was awarded the RIBA First Prize Bronze Medal. David was also the first Louis Kahn visiting professor at the University of Pennsylvania and was the Kenzo Tange Professor in Architecture at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. He has lectured widely, won numerous awards and prizes, authored several books, and brought his design perspective to television and radio. Among other honors and distinctions, David received an honorary doctorate of the arts from the University of East London in November 2007, and, as noted earlier, is an honorary fellow of the American Institute of Architects. So one could go on and on about the success of these two gentlemen, but without further ado, please join me in welcoming David Adjaye and Phil Freelon. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, and I want to thank the BSA, including Larry Chan, who is the sitting president. Audrey's coming in as president-elect. Excuse me, and the Loeb Fellowship. It's truly a pleasure to come back here for the 40th reunion and to see my fellow fellows, those that I know and some that I don't, and hope to get to know better. This week also marks, as Audrey said, the National Organization of Minority Architects annual conference here in Boston and Cambridge, and I'm happy to see some of my NOMA colleagues in the audience. It's always good to see friendly faces in situations like this. I also see some of my MIT students, and I know I appreciate that quite a bit because they're in the middle of their thesis semester, and that's quite an honor for them to come in. This evening, I'll set the stage for my friend and colleague David Adjaye as we share with you the current state of development of this wonderful project we have been working on for the past year, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, located on the Mall in Washington, D.C. I want to take a moment to put this incredible project into context, however. How it came about, its physical context, the site, and where we are in the process. Culturally specific museums have seen an increase in number and visitorship in recent years. As the U.S. population's median age increases, we see a heightened interest in cultural tourism and the exploration of family history and cultural heritage. Our approach to designs of institutions of this type is to fully integrate the building with the exhibits. And these exhibits tend to be long-term, if not permanent. That's first. And secondly, we strive to meet the vision and express the vision of the institution in the architecture, as Jim mentioned, and use the building to help convey the theme or the message, as opposed to simply creating a beautiful building or a vessel to house exhibits and galleries. Now, in the case of art museums, it's often appropriate to provide a backdrop-type building for the artwork. And we see a good recent example of this is the North Carolina Museum of Art expansion by Thomas Pfeiffer, which is a beautiful sort of background-type building. However, when we think about a vision of history and culture, we feel that it is appropriate and even essential to imbue the building form with meaning and elicit an emotional response. My firm has had the privilege of designing and building a number of African and African-American themed museums and institutions in America in the recent past. If we can bring the lights down. These include, very briefly, the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum in Baltimore, the International Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta, and the Gantt Center in Charlotte. And so we feel that it's appropriate then to, in this case, we're mimicking and showing the interlocking arms that we often see as the iconic image of civil rights movement where folks are unified and marching. And as we look at the Gantt Center as an example, the site is located in the heart of Charlotte in an area where there's a lot of development. And it's in the midst of some other rather prominent structures by architects you may know. And here, there's a 48-story tower, and that complex has 10 stories of parking below it, and the site that was offered to us by the city was the site where the ramps go down with trucks and cars to feed 10 stories of below-grade parking. And my client was kind of upset about that. He said, here we go again, crumbs off the table. And we said, look, give us a weekend to kind of see what could be possible here. And as architects, as we often do, we try and find opportunities in the difficult situations. Here's the tower. Here's our center. There's a truck ramp on the bottom, and cars enter the middle of the site and come down to access the parking. And the site is 55 feet by 400 feet. In doing our research, we found that this was one of those neighborhoods, and this is a familiar story, where desegregation comes in and two things happen to those vibrant African-American neighborhoods. They begin to disintegrate because of the integration, and also the cultural institutions there disappear. And when you had standalone hospitals, hotels, theaters, schools, and so on. And in our research, we came across the Myers School, and it was nicknamed the Jacob's Ladder School because during commencement and other activities outdoors, they would pose on the fire escapes on the stairs. And we found that the reference to Jacob's Ladder was not only the biblical reference, but it was a representation that education is the path to advancement in this country. And we wanted to find a way not only to recognize the community that had disappeared on this site in this part of town, but also tie it back to the historic Myers School, the Jacob's Ladder School. We also looked at African-American quilting patterns and wanted to find a way also to incorporate this as we looked at the skin of the building. And so the partee, in this case, in elevation, is to raise the building and provide escalators and elevators up to the lobby, and then to wrap the building in this African-American quilt and allowing the trucks and the cars still to enter the site and go to their destination on the other block. So what do you do with a 50-foot by 400-foot site? Well, you enter at both ends, for one thing, and here's the cars going in and the trucks at the other end. And so there's a small lobby here. This is a party wall. There won't be any development there immediately, but eventually there will be, and so no windows are there. What do? We arrange the stairs, toilets, and mechanical along that wall. And so as you get to the top of the escalators and the stairs, it puts you in the center of the building. As we'll see in the upper floors, bringing people to the center eliminates corridors that have to go to the ends. And there's an atrium here, shown in a banquet configuration, multi-purpose classroom, and the first gallery. And once again, all the services along the back party wall. Now, the galleries can assume full depth of the space at this point, cantilevering about 3 feet. And so the aspect ratio, even in a very narrow building, is giving us what we need for the gallery spaces as you bring people to the center of the building. And then finally at the top, there's administrative offices, classroom, and an outdoor terrace overlooking the city. And one side benefit of this long, narrow site is the billboard entry into the city. And you can see the stitching of the quilting. This is a high-tech range screen, very efficient, perforated metal. And Jacob's Ladder is expressed into the atrium here. And this was completed about a year ago. And so the community can see it's not overt, it's not in your face, but people take the time to come in and learn about the history of this site as they're visiting the center. The meaning is revealed, and we think subliminally people get it. On the back side, on that party wall, we created a light sculpture carrying the quilted motif on that side of the building. And the second floor lobby and atrium. and the third floor. The galleries, again, the proportions are quite right. And that sloping wall here from the inside at the very top. And one side benefit of having this prominent location is that it's booked up with revenue-generating events, which helps to sustain the institution. And so, as we look at our site, it's really incredible. And I want you to keep this image in mind as David Adjaye steps to the podium and talks a bit about our concept. I'll switch it over.
Okay, this is Phil's computer, so I'm hands off whilst he kind of does the switch.
Except that.
Can you go to the beginning? I'm just going to give a bit of context to the work that we've been doing over the last decade as Adjaye Associates, as a way of maybe backgrounding some of the things that you might see in the sort of strategies that are in the scheme. When we all came together to do this competition, it's a very unusual thing for 4 firms to come together to do a project. There are actually 4 firms working on this. And it's because of the magnitude of this project and the complexity of this project and also the celebration of this project that we all decided to come together. And that's something that's really important to understand, that we wanted to really, when Max, who was really the kind of ringmaster when we were all doing this, brought us all together, we thought that we would send a different message about collaboration, that we would act as a kind of jazz ensemble, as Max always said, which was an incredible image and a really amazing image, and which is the reason this thing happened. And it's kind of brought us to a position where we work to our strengths, and we're all committed to kind of delivering the best that we can for this vision. Anyway, that gives you a little bit of the background to that. Adjaye Associates is my firm, which is a multidisciplinary firm, and we collaborate with artists, writers, thinkers across many platforms. And our work is always predominantly in the cultural sector and education sector and the arts. There are several art projects that we work on, which are always collaborations with different makers, different organizations. But central to it, I'm not even going to emphatically talk about the projects, is this idea that we investigate notions predominantly to do with light. And light is a really important idea. The discourse about light, I think, in the 21st century is a very important one for me. Not light in the kind of modernist sense of the kind of turn of the century where it's light as a kind of illumination, but the phenomenology of light or the lack of light or the preciousness of light in our urban environments becomes a kind of very important discourse in the work, which repeats again and again. And in certain projects, it manifests itself either talking explicitly about light and structure, specifically. These 2 projects, which are bookends almost between 10 years of kind of research, where this notion is being kind of absolutely made in structures, or the city, the notion of porosity and urbanism, and the way in which light is received into domestic spaces. This is the first house I ever built, where this notion of a kind of turning from the kind of notion of a kind of porosity to the city, the luminosity of the city is kind of reversed, but then light is drawn in as a phenomena into the heart of the domestic realm, right through to the first project, the first residential studio project that I did in the US, which is this volume, which again plays with that phenomena of kind of drawing away from the city and kind of making a system which draws light into the heart of its spaces. This also kind of works within the idea of public projects that we've been doing. The key important public project in this country was the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, where this idea of the study of light in the city is really kind of developed as like an organizing element for the way in which the buildings, the experience of art is made. The conception of the space is conceived as a kind of miniaturization of the city, 3 houses which organize a kind of urbanism and kind of draw light in different ways, horizontally, vertically, etc., to kind of appreciate contemporary art. So this is the volume on the street, the idea of the kind of a container which is also a solar chimney. It's a kind of it's a form which basically is dealing with the huge solar gain of the south, and using that as a kind of plenum chimney to then create a chamber on the inside, which is about light, which is surrounding you, light, which is shafts between spaces, and light, which is drawn specifically to illuminate long walls to make the sort of reading of objects or works on paper. And then just the kind of destinations within that, and then the kind of luminosity of the building at the end as it reverses with day and night. To finally a kind of major project, which is again working with these strategies, but working for the first time in a landscape where the city is kind of encroaching. This is a suburb of Moscow in Russia, where the suburbs are coming, but this is a 27-acre site where you have this landscape, but actually it is a kind of anticipation of a kind of suburbanization and sort of commercialization, which is occurring very fast. This is the two extremities of the site, 3 meters of snow and then incredible spring. So really this is a building which is in a landscape which is a kind of about a winter condition, because the snow is for more or less 8 months, and you get a bit of spring, and then it's back to the grueling weather. That was my first site visit. That picture in the corner was the first site visit, which was a pretty harrowing experience. I've got to learn about Moscow now. I'm good with Moscow. I love it. I've done 4 years. The plans of the building are really this idea of making a vertical campus, another microcosm of urbanism, so a city within a sort of micro-city within a kind of form. This disk is 350 meters wide, so just to give you a sense of the scale. So it's nearly 1,000 feet. Yeah, so it's this kind of city, and it's a scale that we've never worked at, but it's been amazing kind of working at this dimension and making a kind of a hyper condition. And then above it is another scale where these long fingers are, again, 300 odd meters long, sort of referring to the architecture of Brezhnev, etc. But these incredible structures that we were able to do with Russian engineers. We try to do this with Arabs, and I don't diss Arabs in case anybody hears them. But there was a lot of processing power going on with Arabs, and actually we got some engineers from the Russian who were kind of in their heyday in the 60s, and they did this so simply, it was astonishing. We have cantilevers of 70 and 80 feet without any diagonal bracing. It's all just a concrete moment frame. There's a grid, which was astonishing. So just giving you a sense of the building and its landscape. This is the early renderings, the structure. You can see the kind of early drawings of the kind of building. What was kind of amazing when we were working on the project, we realized that Malevich is buried just across the road in the cemetery, which was a beautiful coincidence. The project really is kind of almost making a citadel as a kind of and also a compass. It's orientated. The finger buildings really orientate essentially to make a building which points to the east. That's the east, the kind of jutting forms, and then the other side is the west. So it's a kind of east-west southern bar with a north barometer, which sort of is anticipating this kind of universe that's coming. And then it sits on this podium, which is the world of the school. And this is supposed to be the threat to you guys here. This is supposed to be the threat to the Harvard Business School. So Harvard's over. Sorry. Sorry, playing around. Entrances, and then foyer. So there's kind of sort of auditorium spaces. This is that kind of universe. It's a 30-foot sort of space. These are some of the intimate spaces in it, the auditoriums. And then the kind of spaces that meander around. The plan, because of this circular system, is very interesting because it kind of works as a kind of almost like a kind of a monastery's courtyard. It becomes this kind of circuit that you go round and round and round. It never ends, and it's always orientating you in terms of the plan towards light, because it's the organization fans almost like a sort of compass to kind of measure sunset to sunrise, and then the cool lights in the north. This is the building. So in a way, this is the kind of framework, this idea of the discourse of light and the city making a kind of body of work. And so with that, I think, so this is kind of ending, looking towards east and west. And then I can talk a bit more about what we're all here to see. Okay, now you guys are getting a sneak preview because really we're halfway through the process. But this was such an important event that we put this together. But what you're going to see is a sort of a putting together of a sort of story that we put together of the competition win right through to where we are now. Where the final project really will be unveiled in the spring next year. After we're just beginning the SDs, but we've managed to get through the sort of regulatory process in Washington, so we have a form, which is astonishing. A year and a bit later, we have a form. We can definitely say we have a form. I think we're all kind of learning. I mean, Phil's got a bit of grey already. I'm getting grey now. This project is definitely... Anyway, so this amazing site, just in case you didn't recognize where it was, there it is. DC is a phenomenal city, this representational city, which is incredible, with this Greek revival, classical planning. Just use this. The kind of the phenomenon of the site is really that it's actually at this moment here. This is the mall proper. It's Federal Triangle. This is the White House Oval. This is the Washington Monument grounds, and it's the rest of the other the grounds, and that's the river coming round. It's actually here, so it's in the center of the sort of monumental core, but it's also in a way it's operating as a hinge, really, between the formal kind of high point of the White House and the sort of axiality of the plan. It really is this moment where we're part in the mall, part on the grounds. So the complexity of this project is that it's at once the grounds, which are about notions of pavilions and landscape, and then the mall, which is about a regimented ordering of sort of tempietas on podiums, which kind of make a formal garden. And then the urban edge of the city, which comes right to that corner in its formal sense. That's really the kind of urban grain that one is kind of working with, and that it's in that sort of that spirit that the competition was developed as a kind of strategy to kind of negotiate these very kind of complex urbanisms and complex sort of forces of urbanism which are kind of acting on this site. So this is just a summary of what I just kind of said. And with that, I mean, there are phenomenal sort of positions within that site. There are lots of things to see, of course, in Washington, but the hinge point allows this collection of very important artifacts, sort of in that Rossian sense, of the city to be kind of perceived. So this hinge moment also acts as a kind of panoptic moment, drawing to itself a certain kind of nodal quality, which kind of makes a kind of relationship to the city again. The monument, the archive, the White House, Jefferson, that's where Martin Luther King's monument is going to be, Lincoln, the reflecting pool, and the Capitol, and obviously the grounds of the mall. Just a quick sort of placeholder of the plan, where it is, and just really going to the competition. These are some of the important images of the competition, and I'm sorry that it's overly hierarchical in terms of the images, but this is just the kind of way we kind of play the boards. We looked at a lot of things, and what we said that we wanted to do in kind of analyzing the incredible history of African American people, of the African American people, was to think that actually, what did we want to kind of say about this building? What was the message we wanted to say? And in the end, there are so many stories, but in a way, the kind of unifying story that we started to kind of find that was kind of continually kind of happening throughout this thing was a kind of incredible triumph, or incredible ability to kind of overcome and move through these incredible adversities. So in a way, this motif, when we sort of, let's just go back, sorry, was something that just kept occurring. We had like one room where we placed lots of images, and we were kind of reflecting on these, and continually this celebratory motif, a kind of spiritual sort of a spiritual motif of a sort of victory over certain adversaries that come to you, kept appearing, and we were very moved by that as a kind of form. At the same time, we were doing very specific didactic research into a kind of a trajectory of architectural sort of specificity that we could try and locate to kind of work with. So going back to the beginnings of the, I would call it the civilization of the African American people, and trying to look at the roots of where, you know, this is Du Bois's, the Du Bois Institute's kind of final kind of sort of analysis of specifically where the community comes from in the 9 countries, you know, predominantly Angola and Congo, but also very much West Africa, with a few fragments from Mozambique and Madagascar. But this idea of, in this kind of was that kind of like stop or like the kind of what was kind of amazing about this civilization is that in a way in this culture there were 2 strong predominant ideas that we wanted to kind of work with: the architecture of West Africa, which is kind of personified by the kind of Yoruba kingdoms, and also the architecture of the Congo and Angola. But in a way, the tectonics really are kind of were easier to reference in West Africa, and more there was a kind of an explicit sense of the a kind of renaissance which had occurred in Yoruba art and architecture, which lifted it way above the sort of readings of other kind of sort of trajectories of architectural development. This is kind of something that we became very fascinated with because of its relationship to this. In the imagery of the sort of beginnings of the community in the South, the notion of the porch, which is a predominant image, is a powerful one. And we kind of wanted to understand that connection, and in a way we started to find that this is the porch architecture of the Yoruba. And we were kind of fascinated by that actually there was this kind of, and this is in a palace, but this is a kind of, and in that palace you get caryatids, and the caryatids tell the stories of the histories. The trajectories are kind of memorialized in the columns as a kind of classical column. But we were fascinated by this double loop, which was kind of being specifically drawn through, which comes right through to, you know, the sort of porches of Brooklyn or wherever one might kind of want to take the reference. So we felt that this was a very strong moment to really kind of make a reference to a caryatid and to a specific character in that architecture who was a very important court sculptor, a sort of Michelangelo of the sort of Yoruba, who developed a very specific capital which appears in all the main palaces, which we were fascinated by. And that became the hook, the butterfly for us to start talking about the link between these 2 positions and the way to kind of develop a kind of motif which starts to kind of drive our trajectory as we started to make the form. So these 2 things are really important in really trying to understand the imagery that you then see. Of course, also with architecture is also landscape, and the idea of the working landscape became very important to us. And landscape as a kind of device which negotiates infrastructure was also very important to us. How landscape infrastructure works and how worked landscape is a kind of manifest part of the identity of the community as it moves from the countryside to the city. So these became sort of guiding motifs as we went through, and I'm going to do the simplistic, slightly cool house thing of like, okay, there's the kind of inspiration and there's the form. Here they are, just so that you know. These are the really important images, the porch, the working landscape. I'm doing this very simplistic and deliberately, but it's very important. There are the kind of abstractions, because, you know, we get accused of not making kind of connections to things. And these things magically add up to this. So this is the competition-winning scheme. This is kind of an amazing, and it really was an amazing kind of piece of research for the entire team to make. But essential to this was this notion of making this podium, which was dealing with the notion of the mall, and this corona, which was dealing essentially. What we also found fascinating was that the motif of the corona also made a kind of reference, because of the relationship of the site, to the needle, which is a pharaonic symbol. I mean, the interesting sort of story of Washington is that it plays between the Greek and the Egyptian, doesn't it? It's so obvious when you look at it, but nobody says it. But there it is. Cleopatra, you know, that needle is really one of the pylons of Karnak. You know, that Washington, I mean, you know, that's what it is. Washington Memorial is a needle from Karnak Temple, one of the oldest religious structures in the world. It's one of the 3 pylons which connects to the sky. Da-da, there it is. And then the dome of, the neoclassical Greek, the Enlightenment, there it is. These are the 2 poles. So we actually sit towards the pharaonic end of. It's like, now, call that divine, call that whatever you want, but here we are. And in a way, this Yoruba motif, ironically, is, and the Yoruba are also kind of supposed to be connected to a certain kind of trajectory of the Egyptian artistic class. That's the mythology of it. So in a way, there's something very interesting about all these loops that we're kind of really enjoying too. And in a way, the form acts as a kind of upside-down pyramid, ziggurat, to the needle. So there's a kind of contextualization which naturally starts to occur with these associations, which is really important. This is the competition entry that we would make a metal object, the first metal object on the mall. This is the idea of making a bronze corona. In a way, that capital, also being on the head of a king, was also a kind of way of talking about celebration. So the celebration of this incredible trajectory, the story of this incredible people over this couple of 100 years, becomes a story about celebration, not about trauma. We said this is a story not about trauma, but about triumph, really, continually triumphing. So in a way, that's the message that we felt was the kind of power of making this artifact at this moment. And in this context, the podium to make that crown was the kind of idea of this project. Loaded in this, we knew that we were going to fight with everybody in Washington. So, compromise. Not really. Fighting strategies, maybe. We developed we developed a building which we knew was massive for the site. And deliberately, it was a large-scale form, and we knew that we were going to have to go through the system. Inherent in the system was that we had to develop after the competition, we had to develop 3 alternatives, because that's what the government requires, that's what the bureaucracy requires. You can't get around it. You can be whoever you want. You're not getting around it. You've got to produce 3 alternatives. But we managed to kind of develop a notion of irreducible elements within this, which was acceptable, and then through the notion of irreducible elements, make the arguments. So we developed 3 schemes, and the irreducible elements was the notion of the corona and the porch. So what we did was to say, within that form, the competition entry was a plinth with these elements on it. The plinth became sort of eroded to become the porch. We would develop a second strategy, which would be to break the building in 2 and turn it much more into an urban context where you had a form, a sort of major and minor volume with a space, and then finally we would make what we call the pavilion, which would sit in the landscape. In the end, that's where we were always hoping we were going to get to, and luckily we've sort of got to this and worked with it and reduced it, and sort of we're here. So what we have now is a sort of building which is zigguratting. It's really the crown levitating above the sort of mound of the landscape. And we think we sort of managed to get to where we want to be. So this is just diagrammatically just some screenshots showing you what's going on. We're sort of working, the landscape is absolutely still developing. Catherine Gustafsson is landscape designer working with us, so that's ongoing, so it's not fair to even talk about it yet. But essentially the building sits on a kind of position, which I will talk about in a second, which makes a relationship. This is imbue, this is the east wing, this is Gordon Bunshaft, the sort of structural genius here, NMAI, Arts and Industry, the Castle, Natural History, American, and the Gallery, the art building. So you can see this is an important organizing principle from the Macmillan Plan of the city, which is this 445 rule. And this is the rule which organizes the facade system for the mall. And so our building sits with the canopy projection lining up with that phenomena, and sort of, in a way, stepping away from the lining of this moment, which was what was being insisted, to kind of make a kind of relationship, a bookend relationship with imbue. So in a way, what you're getting is a kind of triangle, a circle, and a square, kind of making this trajectory. This is where we are. I don't think it's a compromise. So we have the triple corona And then we have a canopy which works within that form. So in a way, there are 4 forms almost folding up. And then there's a kind of landscape that we're developing which gathers you into this very transparent sort of public room. And then the galleries are organized above with a terrace on the roof and also below. There's a concourse level below. We can't show you the kind of gallery spaces yet because we're still working on those and it's been developed. So in a way, I sort of have to just quickly talk about the kind of exteriority and the kind of phenomena of the exteriority. But I hope that that's, you'll have to come back or you'll have to invite us back in the spring to kind of finish that. But we have an animation which starts to hint at what's going on. We're working with Guy Nordstein, who's an amazing engineer. This is a 210 feet kind of structure on 2 columns that we're developing, which is tilted, which will work with a reflecting pool, which basically is in 2 directions. This is a slot where moving water and still water join and fall, and it's talking about the past and the future. But also, this is south, and it's making a kind of new public porch, which is not the scale of the domestic, but the scale of the civic, where this is a kind of, this is 200 feet, this is 60 feet. So this is a kind of public space, a sort of blurring indoor-outdoor space where the reflections of water are permanently playing on the ceiling. So we're really working with that. The hot summer, sort of humid sun that's kind of working in DC. This tilt kind of makes this phenomena of this movement and this motion of nature continually in the sort of entrance of the building. The center of the building has this form where the content of the museum, this kind of timber body that's sort of inside this bronze skin held on these concrete sort of legs, is really a kind of almost a kind of a frozen descent of the content above your head, sort of bringing you into a kind of fusion, like a caryatid into the content. The content is above you and below you. You stand in that. So in a way, you're being made into that idea of the story, which the caryatid is when you enter this place. This is the space of that place where information is given. This north and south, east, west axes are completely clear, and it becomes a room where changing exhibitions, temporary exhibitions occur, and becomes a kind of a public room for DC as well as the foyer for the museum. The building explicitly denies a kind of central atrium, but works with this notion of the content, which is the central form, the body, this wooden and concrete form, and then the bronze corona, which from the interior is open to the sky. So from the urban scenario, you have the bronze shingle system, which is being developed, which modulates the sun, curates views, and then from the interior, you have this skylight moment, which is looking at the 4 lights, because the building also is acting as a kind of a form which is monitoring south, west, east, north light. There's a kind of moment that we're developing, which is a kind of a reflection moment, a kind of memorial moment, where we've positioned an oculux so that the edge of the building and the monument are framed in a westerly oculux, which has water descending downwards into a chamber, a sort of pool permanently as a kind of reflecting space, with the words of justice falling down like rain, kind of encapsulated around the balustrade, and then sort of surrounded by the history galleries. This is giving you a moment where we're articulating those places that are connecting to the content inside the building. And then the rear, I mean, this is becoming the form that starts to kind of finish that relationship of the mall coming to the monument, and then the grounds, the pavilion with the needle. Okay, we're going to show you a little animation, which we did for our client, which we never usually show architects because we don't want them to know about this, but this is our secret weapon. Never touch another man's computer. To full screen it. If it's the screen.
Don't be shy. Why don't I start? I'm curious how you came about deciding how you selected the team. What was your, how did you come together in terms of starting this competition?
Well, David mentioned Max Bond, who is a graduate of the GSD here and widely regarded as the dean of African American architects. Max and I got together early on to do the programming and pre-design work. And so we had that opportunity to build a relationship with the client It generated an 1,100-page document that was the basis for design. And while that process was winding up, the competition phase was gearing up. And so David called, and we met in New York, the three of us, and decided that we would expand the team, and it became Freelon Adjaye. And you know, we knew about David, and we're wondering, well, what's this guy going to be like? And it turned out to be fantastic, and the working relationship is going very well.
Are you guys warmed up yet?
There's one.
Brandon?
There's a microphone coming for you.
There are two microphones, actually. I believe one on each side. So if you could pass it along when you're finished, that'd be super.
Hi, my name is Brandy Brooks. I'm director of the Rudy Bruner Award for Urban Excellence, and thank you. That was outstanding. I can't wait to visit. One of my questions, as you all were doing your research, obviously as African Americans have come over here, we've all sort of become one pot of folks, but as your map showed, you have people coming from a variety of different cultures all across Western and Southern Africa. How did you try to express that through the things that you were doing in your architecture, as well as, you know, how do you hope that that's going to play out in the museum itself, given that we've become one pot here, but we're actually a pretty diverse range of people where we come from?
It's the million-dollar question, right? You know, we had lots of debates about this point, and what we wanted to kind of look at was not to try and sort of do a sort of representation of the bouillabaisse, as it were. You know, we didn't want to say, okay, we'll do a percentage run of everybody and somehow represent that. But to sort of, in a way, there's a kind of fallacy. Actually, looking at those maps, there's a kind of fallacy about the continent, which is that the political boundaries, which is what those were, are not really the real actual agenda. So when you talk about different sort of people, really what you're talking about is actually maybe two or three different types, because it's really it's basically forest savanna people, which is a kind of very explicit culture, which is kind of river culture and kind of land culture, agricultural kind of people, who basically kind of range from different linguistic kind of influences, but also had very clear epicenters in terms of empire. So what we thought was actually, like any civilization, there are places where it flourishes and peaks, and we just said, okay, where the flourishing peaks, and for us, in terms of the kind of dominant group that was coming from the thing, the Yoruba was actually the peak of that kind of aesthetic trajectory. And since we were looking, we thought, you know, people don't look for architecture. It's usually typical to look for artifacts or objects and stuff like that. Which, so actually, let's look for the clues about architecture. Actually, what is the architecture? Because somehow it must be in there, in the DNA as well. And I think in the images that, when we sort of found that clue, that was the sort of CSI moment for us. It was like, okay, from that moment, we could track all the other images. Because when you looked at an image in, you know, as I was saying, from Brooklyn through to, you know, it was the same thing kind of occurring again and again in different ways.
Yeah. And it's a framework. Obviously, the exhibit design is going to have a major part in how the stories are told. And so it breaks down into the different pieces and messages as we integrate exhibitry into the building, which is beginning to happen.
Yeah, we haven't shown any of that. There's actually more than 50% of the building which we haven't even talked about yet, which is the content, and that nuance is being played out right now, but it's not fair to talk to it because it's just starting now.
Thank you. Front row.
I'm Kathy Crenshaw, and I'm a Loeb Fellow from Birmingham, Alabama. And in our city, we are keenly aware that it is coming up in 3 years to the 50th anniversary of 1963, which in our city represented the Children's March in May, of course, the King's Speech in August, and the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in September. My question is about timing and the opportunity in terms of when this will be unveiled and to connect it to that 50th year commemoration.
Well, we're scheduled to break ground in about a year and a half, and it may be phased construction. We're still trying to figure that out, but the opening date has been set for the end of 2015. So There are points in time. 1960 is another one. That was the Greensboro sit-in, and so there are junctions that you can connect to throughout history. We may have missed the 50th of 63, but we'll be connecting to others along the way. But we're looking at 2015 for occupancy.
I believe there was a gentleman in the fourth row back.
Thank you very much for a convincing presentation on the notion of symbolism and representation in architecture. And my question goes to the development of the skin, because in the present, because you show in your renderings a diagrid, which is a very ubiquitous sort of modernist expression now. And it seems to me that that development of that expression will have a very huge impact on this whole notion of the representation that you've dealt with in Absolutely. The more sort of larger scale. So I wondered if you could talk about whether this in fact is where you're going with it, or whether you're still exploring it, and what are your thoughts on that expression of the skin?
Well, the reason we're laughing now is because we're in the thick of it with the client on this, David.
No, absolutely. We just did a session on it with the engineers. I mean, what's interesting is, how do you make, when we want to make a structural representation? So there's a kind of big discussion that we're having right now about how we do that. And what does that, how do we kind of manifest the structure? Are we just using kind of, just scientific didactic reasoning? Or are we trying to kind of bring another story? And this project has kind of forced us all to engage in a whole new set of kind of discourses. So in a way, it's really, that was actually, those images were actually 3 months ago.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of already out of date.
There's been a lot of development since then.
It's completely out of date. I mean, the skin is, at the moment, the skin is like a very sophisticated thing that we're working on, to do with the kind of panelization, the operation, there are operable systems in it. It kind of opens. We haven't shown you any of that. But basically, there are these, when I made reference to the kind of 9 sort of what I call artifacts of the context, there are these special operations that we're working in where the skin more or less opens to kind of reveal these things. But somehow, in terms of movement, still allows you to sense the notion of the sort of mass of the volume. We don't want, we're in this trauma of not wanting to tear the form, but also allow moments to occur. And it's kind of causing very interesting other conversations too. One, how is this being held? How is this being kind of articulated in terms of its system, and what does it all mean? So
there's a sustainable component to it as well, where the corona is acting as an insulator to the content inside, and so that airstream and that buffer is playing a role in the sustainability and efficiency of the building.
So when you mentioned client, can you just talk a little bit about who the client is and who is
Phil.
the final decision maker?
I'll tell you, there are so many clients. We just got through the National Capital Planning Commission. They're clients of sorts because they have approval jurisdiction. There's the CFA, the Commission of Fine Arts, and oftentimes those two bodies may not agree on a direction, so that's difficult to navigate. Now, the Smithsonian is almost like a mini city all in itself. They have their
Vatican.
Own, yeah. And even within the Smithsonian, there are distinct groups.
City of Architects, by any chance?
Oh, no, there are a few there. But you've got a contracting arm, you have a project management arm, and then the client, who's Lonnie Bunch and the museum, is yet a third piece of the Smithsonian. So it's been a challenge and rewarding to navigate those waters. We're getting through. So far, so good.
Great. Fantastic. Yes.
Thank you. That's thrilling to see. I love the image of the contemplative space where you see the monument and the edge of the building. And I was wondering, what's been the discussion about your relationship with the other neighbor, American history?
There's a whole discussion, right? Because actually American history is being refurbished and they're kind of thinking about some work on the western edge. So there's a whole debate about what you actually see and what is the relationship to us. I mean, there's been phenomenal discussion about moving 3 degrees back 44 degrees forward. Are we lining up? Are we not? If we don't line up, what does that mean? If we do line up, what does that mean? I cannot tell you how the minutiae of, like, we've drilled right into. So there's been, there's actually a kind of formal relationship to NMAI in terms of its kind of profile. There's a kind of penthouse and there's a kind of volume. In the beginning, we in the competition were explicitly kind of referencing it because we talked about the notion of the podium and the object with the penthouse. And so we were kind of absolutely referencing it, but we said we would undermine it instead of it being a kind of formal structure where it's rooted in the ground. This would be a levitating structure at the end. So to kind of to talk about the notion that there was a landscape, it wasn't an urban grid. So that was the levitation.
Alignment was one of those issues where NCPC, National Capital Planning Commission, and Commission of Fine Arts weren't in agreement. One wanted it aligned, the other wanted it moved south. So it's probably going to be somewhere in between. The other thing to think about here is the actual landscape itself, the existing landscape. And if you're on the ground there, you can't really see both buildings in the same eye shot.
No.
I don't even care if it's wintertime and there aren't any leaves on the trees. It's very dense at eye level. And there was lots of discussion about, well, how are you impacting the mall if the building moves slightly southward? The answer is it doesn't impact it at all because the only way you see that is from Washington
Air Force
Monument
One.
or Air Force One.
I mean, basically, it was fascinating. We all the exercises in a way were completely academic in a way because the tree foliage and landscape is so clearly articulated to kind of frame the views and to control the views that you're actually not impacting it at that point. You actually can't see our building really from American history. You can't. You can only see it from the Bunshaft's great window. Bunshaft made the fantastic, I don't know if you know the Bunshaft building, but the donut has one window on the mall. It's the great point to see everything. So his window works with us.
Other questions? Oh, you have a follow-up.
Can you do two? No.
I'm sorry, who
There's some
was,
people who haven't spoken.
Yes, back in the back on the left.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation, and I love the idea of celebration representing African-American culture. And
Great.
I was waiting for you to show the image of the African-American lady with her hat, equating the crown.
It's coming.
It's coming, okay.
Stay tuned.
And that's one thing. And another point I want to make is you, Philip Freelon, you didn't mention the fact that Harvey Gantt actually was an early African-American architect. So I think that's something that this audience would have appreciated.
Absolutely.
My question is the experience of the space. It's a beautiful structure, but what is going to be the person who goes through that museum, that experience? I mean, is this going to be, this is a very symbolic structure for our culture, our history, and I want to sort of have some idea of when we go through that space, are we going to go through some levels of experience that relates to that culture, or is it going to
Absolutely.
be through vis-a-vis the exhibits? I mean, is the museum going to be part of that theme that you discussed earlier? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I could start on that one. The visitor experience is critical. It's the core issue. And so, as David mentioned, it's about celebration, but also it's about telling the truth and telling the difficult stories. And so, in one sense, you want to be welcoming, and this museum is for everyone. It's not just for African Americans. It's a story. It's the quintessential American story, as Lonnie Bunch would say, the director. And so you want people to be welcome, but at the same time, there are the difficult stories that need to be told, and we don't need to candy coat that. There were discussions about a slave ship. If there was going to be one, where would it be? We quickly agreed with the director that shouldn't be front and center. If you have something like that, that can be explored and discovered as you come in. So it's going to be an experience that's sequential in one sense, but also self-directed, if you wish. And the galleries are going to be themed. There'll be history, there'll be sports, there'll be other topics that could be experienced one after the other or self-directed. So all that is in development. It's a big story. It's a big challenge. And as the exhibit designers come on board, that integration process will be even more profound.
I think there are now 50 curators working with the stories and working with us. There are 50 curators hired, and I think there's going to be a few more weaving and talking about the story. there are kind of the subplots even between that's going to come up even in the kind of the way in which the landscape is operating. There's so much loaded symbolism in this that I think you from the kind of moment you kind of get within a certain kind of what I call in that sort of the radiance of the kind of the form, the story begins. So when this project is finished, I think you'll find that it really tries to kind of manifest the universe. And it's a really difficult thing, but we're trying to do it. And Lonnie Bunch and his team are absolutely committed to wanting to kind of make this project live and give that experience that you're talking about. I think right now the images you're looking at, we're still at the form, and we showed you one moment, which was that the water descending moment, as a kind of know that that's going to be magnified throughout the entire building. It's not just a single moment.
Bill, you mentioned that this museum is for everyone, and we talked about telling the story of the African American people. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about sharing the story of the other side of other people in America and their thoughts and how their expression might have been realized in your project as well.
Yeah, I think someone else mentioned it in the comments that the African American community is not homogeneous. It's not one thing. There's a tremendous range in our culture, but we also see that the African American culture has had an impact across the globe. Through the arts, through music, literature, science, etc. And so this is what we're trying to convey. And we think that's why it's a message for everyone. And the piece about triumph, against the odds, making something out of nothing, and it is an American story that's unique. And we find also that there's a lot of interest internationally. Folks want to come and hear about this. Too often we focused on the athletes and entertainers, but there's a lot more depth to the story than that, and this is what we hope to bring out.
I mean, Lonnie provocatively says this is actually the American museum, the first American museum, which I thought was really, really very powerful statement to make. He sees it as the first real American museum.
Wonderful. Other questions? You've got the mic. Wonderful. I'm sorry, it's sort of hard to see you when you're doing that.
I understand there was a challenge with the site. That's my first question. And then the second question is, have you had any challenges with the code interpretation and how you weave that into the design of the building?
Yeah, the site is challenging on lots of different levels. First of all, it's too small, okay? It's 5 acres, and this building would easily fit comfortably on a site 2-3 times that size. And so there's quite a bit underground. And so you want to make sure that those spaces that are below grade have the natural light. People don't feel like they're in a second-class environment below. That's why you see the Oculus and other methods of getting light down there. The site's got lots of utilities running through it. There's a major gas line along, I can go on and on about that. We've got a team of civil engineers and engineers helping us figure out those issues. It used to be a marsh. Tiber Creek was a stream and river that ran through there. And so we're going to have to do a slurry wall system. I'm getting too technical, but suffice to say, containing the water on the perimeter, especially since we're having so much below grade, is going to be a challenge. But it's achievable. So codes, yeah, we meet every week about that. There are interpretations about stair widths and things, and we're working very well with the DC system to get through those issues.
My question is that you research stories and artifacts very carefully to inform the building. To what extent and in what ways do you think the resultant building will affect the stories being told in it? And I ask that because there was only one, other than large-scale imagery, which I saw in your renderings, there was only one exhibit technique, and that was something very similar to what David Small installed in the Museum of the Peace Prize in Norway, of computers in a blue field. is that a hint of an attitude towards exhibit design that you folks have? I ask this as an interactive part.
That was my project, by the way. Yeah, David was working for me. Yeah. It's my concept. FYI. There's actually the content is, if you think that there's maybe 7,000 pieces of stuff, only 1,000 of them are probably objects, and the rest of it is documents and data. So the museum actually is a kind of real, it's a real museum that's talking about the 20th century, archiving the 20th century, and displaying it in the 21st century. So actually at its heart is a kind of, you need to radically think about what the notion of exhibit is. So what we were trying to do by hinting at those things is that actually the idea of media is going to be really important in this. Media and acoustics are going to be important, and how you share information and how you make community around information and how you talk about ideas is going to be central. So it's not just going to be glass boxes and objects, because actually that's very few. I mean, Phil was talking about the slave ship issue. We went down to Cuba with the team to kind of look at the fragments, and actually in the end, do you reconstruct a ship, or actually, where the museum is more going is maybe you get a fragment of the True Cross, actually more powerful. So there's a huge set of discussions which are really moving from that, traditional kind of edification museums really were about artifacts coming from one place to the other intact. And this is a very different thing where you're kind of working with teasing stories, finding fragments, reenacting atmospheres. I mean, the Smithsonian has the most extraordinary archive of acoustic, music from the fields right through to, the kind of jazz. I mean, it's like amazing, the content when you're in it, but it's all not been put out. So I think it's really very exciting interpretation. So those were trying to hint at it, but it's still not even where it's going to be.
Also remember the purpose of that fly-through was fundraising. Even before
and making the board
design
happy.
was done. Yeah, and don't read too much into things like exhibitry from that.
I know Steve Lewis, Loeb Fellow 0607 and current president of NOMA. Thank you, gentlemen, friends, for bringing your process to light. And I know my board is sitting here wondering why it took me so long to get the mic. but yeah, in my class, my Loeb class, what's it? But I've literally been sitting here biting my lip. No, I'm going to take the conversation into some other territory that may be maybe more provocative. During the competition phase, there was a lot of discussion that came about in terms of, and I wrote about it in a piece called Who Will Tell the Story? And as you sit here and talk so effortlessly about the concept, which is rooted in something that is very familiar, one wonders about the authenticity and perhaps legitimacy to have, as designers of this project, an African and an African American, knowing that the story, as you've described it, is one of a more holistic piece of America. As we know, your team, the Fab Studio, Freelon Adjaye Bond, was was the only African American team, designed lead team, going after the project. What kind of thoughts were going through your mind as you were competing for this, in terms of the importance of having that legitimacy, if you do consider it a necessity to do this particular project?
Oh, first of all, I think the jury selected the best scheme. Number one. It's a happy coincidence that we are of African descent. And, I'm often asked what makes African American architecture. Well, the fact that
he's doing it.
I'm doing it makes it African American. And so in any endeavor of that sort, you bring your personal experiences to it. In any sort of art form, it begins with, who you are and how your career is developed and those experiences that you bring to your craft. And in that sense, it's authentic because of who we are. Is it necessary? I don't think so. We're doing museums that aren't themed in this manner. And we feel like we can, relate to other stories as well. So, in fact, I think it's a dangerous box that you can get put into to say this is all that you do. And we often tell our clients, a lot of our museums are themed that way because those clients trust us and they see a connection. But we also have other clients that see that the same sort of rigor and imagination and effort can go into different types of work. So.
I think you said it really well. Do you want to add to that?
Does that do it for you, Steve? Okay.
Because I'll just say the same thing a different way.
I think he'll be talking to you later about that.
We'll have it over a beer. Okay.
This is sort of related to the question that just came before, and I'm wondering about the really beautiful sculptural ceiling piece, and as sort of an abstraction of content and this cacophony of media, and how that's significant in the space.
How that's significant in the space?
Or, as the content,
Absolutely. No, it's a good question. And I think throughout this whole thing, we're wrestling with notions. What is the authentic? Is kind of something we've been wrestling with, and what is tangible, and in a way something that we can kind of directly kind of deal with, and that's part of the sort of difficulty of dealing with narratives in a way, multiple narratives. But I mean, there are moments that we've been able to kind of say, okay, this is a kind of clear thing that we can start to grapple, and one is this notion of the kind of development of the corona, the notion of the kind of oculus, the notion of the kind of body within the crown, and the notion of the weight of that body as a kind of idea. We basically didn't want to sort of say that this was a kind of standard museum experience that you were coming into. So we wanted to kind of somehow talk about that in the celebration, actually, there's a kind of ton of trauma. Yeah. Ton of trauma. I mean, like weeping trauma. So in a way, the inside is a kind of counter to the kind of outside, isn't it? So it's a kind of good way to. Okay.
Right. Yes. And then I think we have time for one more question after this one.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Phil, you mentioned that there's a lot of sustainable elements with the exterior of the building and African Americans being sustainable people. How are you going to represent that, or were you directed to be LEED, silver, or gold, or platinum, or what are your intentions on reusing all that water and everything else that goes in that building?
Yes, the goal is LEED, gold, or better, and that is in our contract. Also, you mentioned the site and water. The water feature to the north along Constitution Avenue is actually a reclamation feature for stormwater runoff, and so it's a working landscape in that sense. It will be beautiful, but it will also have a role in mitigating stormwater runoff, and that's just one example of what we're doing on the site. So it's ingrained in the design. From day one, we've been talking about it. It hasn't been applied afterward. It's been a core of our thinking from the very beginning. We have Rocky Mountain Institute out of Colorado as our consultant for this, but all of us are LEED certified. It's on the top of our minds and everything that we do.
When someone who hasn't asked a question yet. Sorry, Roz.
Thank you for lecturing today. I've been actually waiting for your lecture for more than a year, so thank you. I'm wondering, what are your ideas about museum as an institution? You've discussed how much history, African American history, has been ignored, has relied a lot on oral history. As an institution, how important is access or engaging the public in terms of information? I see that your structure relies a lot on the internal, and I'm wondering whether you challenge the museum as an institution, that it doesn't provide access to people and its history.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that Max Bond and I, we did the earlier phase, the programming, and part of that scope was to engage the public across the country. I mean, we had 8 or 10 visits to urban, rural areas in forums where folks could talk about their vision for the museum. All that was documented. It was part of the exhibit master plan, which is a component of the programming document. So public engagement has been there from those early stages, and it's going to continue through design. Outreach is going to continue as the design develops. Folks will have a chance to react to it, have input, and I know that Dr. Bunch, the director, is committed to that ongoing all the time. He's traveling around the country continuously and around the world, making sure that there are the tentacles of access that continue to inform the project.
I mean, and with that, I mean, in terms of the way in which the building is also being set up, there's been a huge effort to actually discuss exactly what you're saying, that what is the nature of this structure and how does it kind of work within those models that have been set up about museology and the representation of museology. And in a way, if we talk about museums as kind of somehow sort of palaces of edification or enlightenment or wonder or archive, which is the kind of trajectory of the topology. What is this and how does that work and how do you make access? And in a way, we're in an age where we don't need to kind of make that journey to the place to get the content. You know, what is that idea? And if you notice, we've tried to, that was one of the kind of central things that we questioned right from the beginning of this thing, that actually we wanted to make a public room for Washington. Actually, that was the first move. The first move was not to make a kind of entrance to the museum, it was to make a public room, a gathering spot. So in a way, it's a kind of through space in that landscape where you can all come in, and it's basically an open landscape. So that was one way of dissolving the institutional barrier, which sort of says we're in a temple, we're in a modium, you know, here we are, you know, this is about higher. And then the idea is to then stimulate you from that encounter in that public space to kind of want to kind of engage like a landscape. So we are very sensitive to that model. It's kind of at the heart of the thinking.
And there's a program element to this that has nothing to do with the architecture. And I know that the museum and the Smithsonian have partnerships around the country with other institutions. And in that way, there's a network of Smithsonian affiliated and others that aren't, but they're still part of the network that feeds into this.
So once you have your public room and people are drawn here from all over the world, what is the message that you want them to go away with? So I've visited, I've experienced everything, and I'm leaving. What is that powerful, emotional thing that you want them to take with them?
Definitely the H word, isn't it? Definitely the H word.
Well, I think we would hope that people would be changed
Sure.
as a result of going through. And that's probably going to be different for everyone. Something might touch you because of your personal experience in a certain gallery that would just not resonate with someone else. So it's going to be, there isn't one thing that we're looking that everyone would take away. We would hope that it would be deep enough and complex enough that everyone can find something that will enlighten them and change them in some way.
Sure.
The H word is hope.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
H. Hope.
Why, what were you guys thinking? Heart.
Heart.
Wonderful.
Whole H word.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for coming again. The next lecture will take place on November 3rd at the Boston Public Library, the usual forum, when we will hear from James Wines of Site Architecture, who will present his ideas about the continuing relevance of hand drawing in the digital age. Nazneen Cooper. Yeah, remember that?